The wagon wheel splintered with a sickening crack, sending Bethany O'Sullivan lurching forward against the wooden bench as her four-horse team whinnied in distress. She gripped the reins tighter, heart hammering against her corset as the wagon tilted dangerously to one side, the broken wheel collapsing beneath the weight of her worldly possessions. A cloud of dust swirled around her in the scorching Nevada desert, miles from Goldfield and even further from the life she'd left behind in Boston. "Whoa, whoa there," she called to the horses, voice cracking with fear as she fought to keep them steady. Finally bringing them to a halt, Bethany climbed down from the driver's seat, her blue calico dress catching on a nail. The tear in the fabric seemed a fitting companion to the tears of frustration threatening to spill from her eyes. It was 1876, and the promised land of Nevada where her late father's mining claim waited suddenly seemed like a foolish dream. She walked around the wagon, assessing the damage with growing despair. The rear wheel had not just broken, it had shattered, with wooden spokes jutting out like broken bones. Bethany pushed back her bonnet and wiped sweat from her brow. The desert sun beat down mercilessly, and her water supply was limited. She knew enough about the West to understand that her situation was precarious. Miles from town, alone on the trail with no tools to fix the wheel and night approaching death, was a real possibility out here. She was calculating her chances of walking to Goldfield when the sound of hoofbeats made her turn. A rider approached from the west, the direction of town. He rode tall in the saddle, his figure shimmering in the heat. Bethany's hand instinctively moved to the small pistol hidden in the folds of her skirt. Her father had insisted she learn to shoot before his passing, and though she'd rarely had cause to use the skill in Boston society, she was grateful for it now. As the rider drew closer, she could make out his features beneath the wide brim of his hat. Lean and weathered, with a strong jaw darkened by stubble, he had the look of a man who belonged to this harsh land. His clothes were dusty but well-kept denim pants, a faded blue shirt, leather vest, and worn boots with silver spurs that caught the sunlight. He pulled his horse to a stop a respectful distance away. "Afternoon, madam," he called, his voice deep and tinged with a drawl. "Looks like you've had some trouble." "The wheel broke," Bethany replied, keeping her voice steady. "I was headed to Goldfield." The man dismounted with fluid grace, keeping his hands visible. "Name's Preston Parnell," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "Folks call me Prees." "Bethany O'Sullivan," she replied, relaxing her grip on the hidden pistol but not removing her hand entirely. Preston approached the wagon slowly, crouching to examine the broken wheel. He whistled low. "That's a mighty bad break. Traveling alone, Miss O'Sullivan." "Mrs.," she corrected automatically, the lie coming easily. A widow commanded more respect than a spinster in these parts, she'd been told. "My husband passed in Boston. I'm claiming my father's mining stake in Goldfield." Preston nodded, respect flickering in his eyes. She now noticed that were an unusual shade of green like sage after a rare desert rain. "Sorry for your loss, Mrs. O'Sullivan." He continued his inspection of the wheel. "I can fix this, but not here, need proper tools." Hope flickered in Bethany's chest. "You can fix it." "Been working with wood and wheels since I was knee-high to a grasshopper," he said, standing to his full height. He was tall, at least 6 feet, and though lean, he moved with a strength that suggested he wasn't a stranger to hard work. "My ranch is about 3 miles east. I can take you there, fix your wheel, and have you on your way to Goldfield by tomorrow noon." Bethany hesitated, weighing her options. Staying put meant certain danger from the elements or passing strangers with less honorable intentions. Going with this stranger was a risk too, but something in his straightforward manner reassured her. "I have a pistol, Mr. Parnell, and I know how to use it," she said plainly. A smile crossed his face, not mocking but appreciative. "Wouldn't expect anything less from a woman brave enough to cross the country alone. I promise you'll be safe at my place. Got a housekeeper there too, Mrs. Wilkins. She's a proper dragon, wouldn't let me step out of line even if I were inclined to, which I ain't." The mention of another woman at his home eased Bethany's concerns slightly. "Very well, Mr. Parnell, I accept your help. Call me Pries," he said, already moving to unhitch her horses. "We'll hitch your team to my wagon when we get to the ranch. My horse can pull this one with the broken wheel if we unload the heaviest items." For the next half hour, they worked together in the relentless sun, transferring her most valuable possessions to his horse's saddlebags and securing the rest as best they could. Bethany found herself impressed by Preston's efficiency and the way he treated her belongings with care, particularly her father's old surveying equipment. "This is fine gear," he commented, carefully wrapping the brass transit in a soft cloth. "My father was a geologist before he caught gold fever," she explained, handing him a leather-bound book. "His notes and maps are in here. The claim is supposed to be promising." Preston nodded, tucking the book safely away. "Goldfield's booming, but it's a hard place, especially for a woman alone." "I'm not afraid of hard work, Mr. Parnell." "Never suggested you were," he replied, a note of respect in his voice. "Just stating facts." When they finished, Preston helped Bethany onto his horse, then mounted behind her. The proximity was uncomfortable at first. She could feel the solid warmth of his chest against her back, his arms around her as he took the reins. It had been years since she'd been this close to a man, and never one she'd just met. "Ready?" he asked, his breath warm against her ear. Bethany nodded, unable to trust her voice. As they set off at a steady pace, her broken wagon trailing behind them, she couldn't help but wonder what twist of fate had brought this particular cowboy to her rescue, and whether accepting his help was the wisest or most foolish decision she'd made since leaving Boston. The desert landscape rolled by, beautiful in its stark simplicity. Sagebrush and cacti dotted the sandy terrain, and in the distance, mountains rose purple against the horizon. Despite her predicament, Bethany found herself captivated by the wild beauty of Nevada, so different from the manicured gardens and crowded streets of Boston. "What brought you to these parts, Mr. Parnell?" she asked, partly to distract herself from the intimacy of their shared saddle. "Cattle initially," he replied. "Came out from Texas after the war with not much more than the horse under me and dreams of my own spread. Started as a ranch hand, saved every penny, and now I've got a modest place. Not rich by any means, but it's mine." "You fought in the war?" she asked, curious despite herself. There was a pause before he answered. "Yes, madam, Confederate side, though not by choice. Texas didn't give young men much option." His tone was neutral, but she sensed a story there he wasn't eager to tell. "Been 11 years now. Trying to build something better than what was lost." The simple honesty in his words touched something in Bethany. Whatever side he'd fought on, he'd survived and sought to create rather than destroy. There was honor in that. "My father fought for the Union," she said. "He believed in the cause, but he said war made monsters of good men on both sides." "Your father was a wise man," Preston replied quietly. They rode in companionable silence after that, the rhythm of the horse's gait and the gentle jingling of tack the only sounds beyond the occasional desert breeze. As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, painting the landscape in gold and amber hues, a property came into view. Preston's modest place turned out to be more substantial than he'd implied. A neat ranch house built of sturdy timber sat nestled against a rocky outcropping, sheltered from the worst of the desert winds. Several outbuildings, including a large barn, bunkhouse, and what appeared to be a workshop, formed a rough semicircle around a central yard. A corral held several horses, and beyond, Bethany could see cattle grazing on what sparse vegetation the land offered. "Welcome to Sage Creek Ranch," Preston said, a note of pride in his voice. As they approached, a woman emerged from the main house, stout, gray-haired, and wearing a practical cotton dress covered by an apron. She squinted at them, hands on her hips. "Preston Parnell, who's that you've got with you?" she called, her voice carrying across the yard. Mrs. Wilkins, this is Mrs. O'Sullivan, Preston replied as he guided his horse to a stop. Her wagon broke down on the Goldfield Road. We'll be fixing it and sending her on her way tomorrow, Mrs. Wilkins's shrewd eyes assessed Bethany as Preston helped her dismount. Well, don't just stand there in the dirt, child. Come inside before you catch your death in this evening chill. The abrupt shift from the day's heat to the cooler evening air had indeed raised goosebumps on Bethany's arms, though she hardly felt like a child at 25. Thank you, Mrs. Wilkins, she said politely. I appreciate your hospitality. Preston, see to her things, Mrs. Wilkins instructed, already turning back toward the house. Supper's nearly ready, and I won't have it ruined because you're dawdling. Preston tipped his hat to Bethany with a smile. Mrs. Wilkins runs a tight ship. You're in good hands. I'll see to your wagon and horses, then join you for supper. True to her word, Mrs. Wilkins had prepared a hearty meal beef stew with dumplings, cornbread, and preserved peaches. After washing up in the basin provided in a small guest room, Bethany joined the housekeeper in the kitchen. Can I help with anything? She offered, Mrs. Wilkins looked surprised, then pleased. Most ladies who pass through don't offer. You can set the table through there. She nodded toward the dining room. As Bethany arranged plates and utensils on the solid oak table, she took in the details of Preston's home. Though modest by Boston standards, it spoke of care and pride. The furniture was sturdy and well made, the floors swept clean, and a few touches a bookshelf filled with volumes. A landscape painting of Texas bluebonnets hinted at refinement beyond mere frontier survival. Preston joined them shortly, his face freshly washed, hair damp at the temples. He changed into a clean shirt, and without the dust of the trail, Bethany noted that he was quite handsome in a rugged way. Mrs. Wilkins, you've outdone yourself, he said, taking his seat at the head of the table. Mrs. O'Sullivan, I've looked at your wheel. The hub is cracked clean through, but I can fashion a new one. Should have you ready to go by midday tomorrow, as promised. Thank you, Bethany said sincerely. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come along. Providence, Mrs. Wilkins declared, serving the stew. The Lord watches over fools and travelers, and sometimes both at once. Bethany wasn't sure which category she fell into, but she couldn't deny the remarkable timing of Preston's appearance on the road. Conversation flowed easily over dinner. Preston asked thoughtful questions about her father's claim without prying, and shared information about Goldfield that might prove useful where to find reputable assayers, which merchants were fair, which parts of town a lady should avoid. You're well informed for someone who doesn't live in town, Bethany observed. I do business there regularly, Preston explained. Cattle sales, supplies. In a territory this sparsely populated, folks tend to know each other's business across surprising distances. After dinner, they moved to the small parlor where a fire warded off the desert night's chill. Mrs. Wilkins excused herself to retire for the evening, leaving Bethany and Preston alone. Under other circumstances, this might have been improper, but frontier etiquette was more flexible than Boston's rigid social codes. May I ask what really brings you to Nevada, Mrs. O'Sullivan? Preston inquired, settling into an armchair across from her. Most Eastern widows don't trek across the country alone to work mining claims. Bethany hesitated, then decided honesty might serve her better than maintaining her fiction. I'm not actually a widow, Mr. Parnell. That was a practical adaptation for traveling alone. Rather than appearing scandalized, Preston nodded. I figured as much. No offense intended, but you don't quite have the demeanor of a grieving widow. Your secret's safe with me. Thank you. Bethany relaxed slightly. As for why I'm here, my father died 6 months ago, leaving me this claim but little else. I was working as a schoolteacher in Boston, but the position doesn't pay enough to live comfortably. When I learned of my inheritance, it seemed like an opportunity for independence. Teaching experience might serve you well in Goldfield, Preston remarked. Town's growing fast, lots of families with children needing education. Mining's a gamble, even with a promising claim. I've considered that, Bethany admitted. but first I need to see what my father left me." "I owe him that much." Preston studied her face for a moment, then nodded. "Determination will serve you well out here. Nevada doesn't suffer the faint-hearted." "Neither does life as a woman alone in Boston," she replied with unexpected sharpness. A smile touched the corners of Preston's mouth. "Fair point, Miss O'Sullivan." The correction to Miss didn't escape Bethany's notice. "You can still call me Mrs. if you prefer. As you said, it's practical." "I prefer honesty between us," he said simply. "But to others, you'll remain Mrs. O'Sullivan as long as you wish." Something in his tone, the implication of a continuing acquaintance beyond tomorrow's parting, sent an unexpected flutter through Bethany's chest. She attributed it to gratitude and fatigue. "I should retire," she said, rising. "It's been a long day." Preston stood as well, all proper manners despite their rustic surroundings. "Of course. Sleep well, Miss O'Sullivan. I'll start work on your wheel at first light." In the guest room, Bethany changed into her nightgown and sat on the edge of the bed, brushing her long brown hair. Through the small window, she could see stars scattered across the Nevada sky, more brilliant than she'd ever witnessed in the east. The vastness made her feel small yet somehow free. She wondered what her father would think of her now alone at a stranger's ranch, pursuing his desert dream. James O'Sullivan had been unconventional himself, encouraging Bethany's education when most men considered it unnecessary for daughters. He'd taught her to question, to seek, to stand firm. Perhaps this journey would have pleased him. With that comforting thought, she slipped under the patchwork quilt and fell into the deepest sleep she'd experienced since leaving Boston. The following morning brought the scent of coffee and bacon drifting under her door. Bethany dressed quickly in her second-best dress, a practical brown cotton with minimal bustle, and pinned her hair in a simple but neat arrangement. Looking in the small mirror above the washstand, she noted that despite yesterday's ordeal, she appeared rested, her cheeks touched with color from the desert sun. In the kitchen, Mrs. Wilkins was already bustling about. "Good morning, Mrs. O'Sullivan. Help yourself to coffee." "Breakfast in 5 minutes." "Thank you, Mrs. Wilkins, and please call me Bethany." The older woman smiled, her stern countenance softening. "Very well, Bethany. Preston's been up since dawn working on your wheel. Man's determined to see you safely to Goldfield." Bethany felt a curious mixture of gratitude and disappointment at the reminder of her imminent departure. "He's been exceedingly kind." "Kind, yes," Mrs. Wilkins agreed, cracking eggs into a cast-iron skillet. "But not just that. Preston Parnell doesn't do anything halfway, and he doesn't make promises he can't keep." After a hearty breakfast, Bethany ventured out to the workshop where Preston had been laboring on her wagon wheel. The doors stood open, and inside she found him focused intently on shaping a piece of hardwood with careful, precise strokes of a drawknife. He'd removed his shirt in the growing heat, working in just his undershirt, suspenders hanging at his sides. The fabric clung to his broad shoulders, damp with honest sweat. Bethany paused in the doorway, suddenly feeling like an intruder. She was about to retreat when Preston looked up and saw her. "Miss O'Sullivan," he said, setting down his tools and reaching for his shirt. "I didn't hear you approach." "Please don't stop on my account," she said quickly, then blushed at how that might sound. "I mean, I just came to see the progress." Preston smiled as he pulled on his shirt, leaving it unbuttoned. "Almost finished. I've made a new hub from ironwood harder than what you had before. Should serve you better on these rough roads." He gestured to the partially reconstructed wheel. "Just need to fit the spokes and rim, then we can get you on your way." Bethany stepped further into the workshop, genuinely interested in the craftsmanship. "My father could build almost anything, but I never learned such skills." "Never too late," Preston replied, picking up a spoke and demonstrating how it fit into the hub. "Here, try this one." Before she could protest, he was guiding her hands, showing her how to align the spoke and tap it into place with a mallet. His hands were warm and calloused, enveloping hers with gentle strength. "Good," he said softly, his voice close to her ear. "Now give it a solid tap." Bethany brought the mallet down and the spoke slid perfectly into its notch in the hub. She couldn't help the smile that spread across her face at this small accomplishment. "I did it," she said, turning toward him with delight. "You did," he agreed, his eyes crinkling at the corners. For a moment they stood close, hands still touching, gazes locked. Bethany became acutely aware of his proximity, the clean scent of his skin beneath the workshop smells of wood and metal, the flecks of gold in his green eyes. The sound of Mrs. Wilkins calling from the house broke the spell. Bethany stepped back, suddenly conscious of how improper the scene might appear to an observer her in a man's workshop, him half-dressed, their hands entwined over tools. "I should help Mrs. Wilkins with lunch preparations," she said, her voice not quite steady. Preston cleared his throat, returning to the workbench. "Of course. I'll have this ready to mount on your wagon within the hour." True to his word, by early afternoon the wheel was repaired and mounted, the wagon reloaded with Bethany's possessions and her team hitched and ready. Mrs. Wilkins had packed a basket of provisions for her journey: bread, cheese, dried beef, and a jar of preserved peaches. "The road to Goldfield can be dusty," Preston explained as they stood beside the wagon. "There's a creek about halfway where you can water the horses. Should reach town well before sunset if you leave now." "Thank you, Mr. Parnell. Your kindness has been extraordinary," Bethany said formally, extending her hand. He took it, his touch lingering. "It was my pleasure, Miss O'Sullivan." Mrs. Wilkins approached with a final package. "Some extra cornbread for the road, child. And mind you find respectable lodgings in Goldfield. The Palace Hotel is suitable for a lady alone." "Thank you, Mrs. Wilkins," Bethany said, genuinely touched by the woman's concern. Preston helped her up to the driver's seat, handing her the reins. "Safe travels, Bethany," he said, using her given name for the first time. "I hope your father's claim brings you everything you're seeking." With a final nod of gratitude, Bethany clicked to her horses and set the wagon in motion. As she followed the road away from Sage Creek Ranch, she found herself looking back more than once, watching Preston's figure grow smaller in the distance, an unexpected heaviness settling in her chest. The journey to Goldfield passed without incident, the repaired wheel performing flawlessly over the rough terrain. True to Preston's directions, she found the creek where she rested the horses and refreshed herself, arriving in town as the afternoon light began to soften toward evening. Goldfield was larger than she'd expected a proper boomtown, with wooden buildings lining dusty streets, horses hitched outside saloons, and miners, merchants, and all manner of frontier folk going about their business. The contrast with Boston's cobblestone streets and brick buildings couldn't have been more pronounced. Following Mrs. Wilkins's advice, Bethany made her way to the Palace Hotel, a two-story structure that, while modest by Eastern standards, appeared to be one of the finer establishments in town. The clerk, a thin man with spectacles, regarded her with curiosity as she requested a room. "Traveling alone, madam?" he inquired. "I am Mrs. O'Sullivan," she replied with practiced dignity. "I've come to claim my late father's mining stake." The man's eyebrows rose. "O'Sullivan?" "James O'Sullivan's daughter," surprised at being recognized, Bethany nodded. "Yes, that's right." "Well, I'll be. Your father was well respected here, madam. Honest man in a town not known for honesty." He turned the register toward her. "Sign here, room 203, top of the stairs." "Do you need help with your luggage?" Within the hour, Bethany was settled in a clean, if Spartan, room. Her most valuable possessions were safely stored and her wagon and team secured at the livery stable. Sitting on the edge of the bed, she unfolded her father's map, tracing the location of his claim with her finger. According to his notes, it was about 3 miles outside town, close enough to visit tomorrow. A knock at her door startled her. Cautiously, she approached. "Who is it?" "Henry Goldman, madam, town assayer." Word reached me that James O'Sullivan's daughter had arrived. News traveled fast in Goldfield, it seemed. Bethany opened the door to find a middle-aged man with a neatly trimmed beard wearing a respectable suit. "Mr. Goldman, please come in," she said, leaving the door open as propriety demanded. The assayer entered, hat in hand. "I was your father's friend, Mrs. O'Sullivan. He spoke often of his daughter back east. I'm pleased to meet you, Mr. Goldman. I hope you can help me understand more about my father's claim." For the next hour, Goldman explained the status of her inheritance, the legalities, the potential, and the challenges. The claim was legitimate and showed promise, but developing it would require capital she didn't possess. "Your father had partners interested before his passing," Goldman explained. "The Silverstone Mining Company, they've been waiting to speak with his heir." "Are they reputable?" Bethany asked. Goldman hesitated. "They're wealthy and powerful. As for reputable, that depends on who you ask. They've offered fair terms to some, less so to others. I'd advise caution in any dealings with them." After Goldman left, promising to arrange a meeting with the Silverstone representatives the following day, Bethany found herself staring out the window at the bustling Main Street below. Goldfield was a town of opportunity and danger in equal measure, not unlike Boston in some ways, though the rules were different here. She thought of Preston Parnell, his quiet competence and unexpected kindness. In a place where she knew no one, his brief friendship had been a welcome anchor. She wondered if their paths would cross again, then chided herself for the fanciful thought. The West was vast, and she had practical matters to attend to. The next morning, dressed in her best traveling suit navy blue, with modest bustle and matching hat, Bethany met with the Silverstone Mining Company representatives at their offices. Mr. Harrington, the senior partner, was a corpulent man with a walrus mustache and cold eyes that assessed her like a commodity. His associate, Mr. Reed, was younger, sharp-featured, with a smile that never reached his eyes. "Mrs. O'Sullivan," Harrington began after cursory introductions, "we were sorry to hear of your father's passing. He was a knowledgeable prospector." "Thank you," Bethany replied, keeping her expression composed. "I understand you had proposed a partnership regarding his claim." "Indeed." "We'd like to offer you $3,000 for full ownership," Reed interjected smoothly. "A generous sum for a lady in your position." The amount was substantial enough to establish herself comfortably back east, but something in Reed's tone, the assumption of her ignorance, rankled. "Mr. Goldman mentioned partnership, not purchase," she said calmly. "What were the terms you discussed with my father?" Harrington's eyes narrowed slightly. "Your father was considering a 50% stake, with Silverstone providing all development costs, but frankly, Mrs. O'Sullivan, a claim requires management. A woman alone, I'm quite capable of understanding business matters, Mr. Harrington," Bethany interrupted, her Boston education evident in her articulate response. "I'd like to see the claim before discussing terms further." The men exchanged glances. "Of course," Reed said, recovering quickly. "We can arrange transportation tomorrow morning, but I urge you to consider our purchase offer. Mining is no business for a lady." "I'll consider all options after I've seen my inheritance," Bethany replied firmly. That afternoon, she visited the county recorder's office to verify her claims documentation, then stopped at the general store for supplies. As she was examining a sturdy pair of boots more suitable for the terrain than her city shoes, a familiar voice behind her made her heart leap unexpectedly. "Those would serve you better than what you're wearing, Miss O'Sullivan." She turned to find Preston Parnell, hat in hand, a genuine smile warming his features. He looked even more handsome in town clothes, a clean shirt, vest, and his best denims, boots polished to a shine. "Mr. Parnell," she exclaimed, unable to hide her pleasure. "What brings you to Goldfield?" "Cattle business," he replied, and, he added more quietly, checking on a certain Eastern schoolteacher who might need a friend in a new town. The simple admission touched her. "The wheel is holding up beautifully," she told him. "Your craftsmanship is excellent. Glad to hear it." His eyes searched her face. "Have you found your father's claim?" "I'm visiting it tomorrow. The Silverstone Mining Company is providing transportation." A shadow crossed Preston's face. Silverstone, they have a reputation, Miss O'Sullivan, not all of it good. So I've gathered, she replied. They want to buy the claim outright. Preston's brow furrowed. Be careful, Jacob Harrington doesn't take kindly to refusal and he has the law in his pocket. You know him. Know of him. Tried to buy my water rights last year, made threats when I declined. He hesitated, then continued, I don't mean to alarm you, but I'd feel better if you weren't alone with Silverstone's men tomorrow. Bethany considered his concern. She'd felt uneasy herself about Harrington and Reed, but had attributed it to her own inexperience with frontier business dealings. Are you offering to accompany me, Mr. Parnell? She asked. If you'd permit it, he replied. I know something of mining claims. Might spot details you'd miss, being new to the territory. The prospect of Preston's company was both reassuring and confusing. She'd known him barely 2 days, yet felt a trust that usually took months to establish in her careful Boston life. I would welcome your expertise, she decided. But I wouldn't want to impose on your business in town. My business can wait, he said simply. They arranged to meet at the hotel the following morning. As they parted outside the general store, Preston tipped his hat. Until tomorrow, Miss O'Sullivan. Mr. Parnell, she acknowledged, then added, my friends call me Bethany. His smile deepened, revealing a dimple in his left cheek she hadn't noticed before. And mine call me Pries. That evening in her hotel room, Bethany found herself anticipating the morning with unexpected eagerness. She told herself it was the prospect of finally seeing her father's claim, not Preston Parnell's company, that caused this flutter of excitement. Yet as she prepared for bed, her thoughts kept returning to his concerned expression when she'd mentioned Silverstone, his offer of assistance requiring no obligation in return. In Boston, men had courted her with flowery words and extravagant compliments. Preston's straightforward kindness practical, unpretentious, expecting nothing was refreshingly different. Dangerous, too, she realized, for a woman determined to establish her independence in a new territory. The last thing she needed was to develop an attachment to a man she barely knew, no matter how appealing his green eyes and capable hands might be. Morning came with clear skies and mild temperatures. Bethany dressed practically in her new boots, a simple skirt and shirtwaist, her hair secured in a no-nonsense bun. A knock at precisely 8 o'clock announced Preston's arrival. He wasn't alone. Mr. Reed from Silverstone stood beside him in the hotel corridor, displeasure evident beneath his forced smile. Mrs. O'Sullivan, Reed said tightly, I see you've already arranged company for our excursion. Mr. Parnell has kindly offered his expertise, Bethany replied smoothly. I hope that won't be a problem. Not at all, Reed said, though his tone suggested otherwise. Mr. Harrington sends his regrets. He's indisposed this morning, so I'll be escorting you alone. My buggy is waiting outside. The journey to the claim took nearly an hour over increasingly rough terrain. Reed attempted several times to highlight the difficulties of mining development, clearly hoping to strengthen his purchase offer. Preston remained mostly silent, occasionally catching Bethany's eye with a slight shake of his head when Reed's statements strayed into exaggeration. Finally, they crested a ridge, and Reed pointed to a stake bearing a numbered claim marker. Here we are. O'Sullivan's Folly, as your father jokingly called it. Bethany's heart quickened at this tangible connection to her father. The claim occupied a slope leading down to a narrow valley, rocky and seemingly barren to her untrained eye. But as she climbed down from the buggy, she recalled her father's excitement in his letters. There was more here than met the eye. While Reed remained with the horses, Preston accompanied Bethany as she explored the claim, her father's notebook in hand. He showed her how to identify promising rock formations, explaining terms like quartz veins and oxidized outcroppings that her father had mentioned in his notes. Your father knew what he was doing, Preston said quietly as they examined a particular rock face. There are good indications here. Not obvious, but promising. Valuable enough for Silverstone to offer $3,000, she asked. Preston whistled low. That's significant money, but if they're offering that much, they think it's worth considerably more, Bethany finished his thought. They continued their examination, moving away from Reed's earshot. Near the far boundary, Preston crouched suddenly, picking up a rock and turning it in his hand. Without a word, he passed it to Bethany. In the sunlight, she could see faint yellow glints in the quartz. Is that gold? Preston confirmed softly. Not a major vein, but a promising sign. Your father's notes mention finding similar samples. Bethany flipped through the notebook and nodded. Several. He was convinced there's a significant deposit somewhere on the claim. Developing it properly would require investment, Preston cautioned. Silverstone has the resources, but they'd take the lion's share of profits. What would you do if it were your claim? Bethany asked. Preston considered the question seriously. I'd seek different partners. Smaller investors who'd accept a fair arrangement. Or develop it slowly with minimal equipment, taking only what could be extracted without major machinery. Reed's voice called from the buggy, impatience evident. Mrs. O'Sullivan, we should start back soon if we're to reach town before dark. On the return journey, Reed pressed his case more directly. Have you considered our offer, Mrs. O'Sullivan? $3,000 would set you up comfortably without the risks of mining development. I'll need time to consider all options, Bethany replied diplomatically. Silverstone doesn't extend offers indefinitely, Reed said, a note of warning in his voice. Other claims are available. Then perhaps Silverstone should pursue those other claims, Preston interjected mildly. A hasty decision rarely benefits anyone. Reed's jaw tightened, but he said nothing more until they reached the hotel. As Bethany descended from the buggy, he offered a final comment. We'll expect your answer by the end of the week, Mrs. O'Sullivan. Mr. Harrington doesn't appreciate indecision. After Reed departed, Preston escorted Bethany into the hotel lobby. I don't like his tone, he said quietly. Silverstone isn't accustomed to being refused. What could they do? Bethany asked. The claim is legally mine. Legal ownership means less out here than it does in the East, Preston replied grimly. Claims have been jumped for less promising signs than what your father found. The law is 3 days ride away in Carson City, and a lot can happen in 3 days. Bethany's earlier elation at discovering gold faded somewhat at this sobering reality. What would you suggest? Be careful who you trust with information about the claim. And he hesitated, then continued, consider staying at my ranch until you've decided how to proceed. It's safer than town, where Harrington has eyes and ears everywhere. The suggestion startled her. That's very kind, but I couldn't impose. It's not an imposition, Preston assured her. Mrs. Wilkins would welcome the company. And it would give you time to consider your options away from Silverstone's pressure. Bethany weighed the offer. Her room at the palace was expensive, draining her limited funds daily, and the thought of returning to the peaceful ranch was appealing after the noise and dust of Goldfield. Perhaps for a few days, she conceded. While I review my father's notes more thoroughly. Relief flickered across Preston's features. Good, I have business to conclude tomorrow morning. I could collect you around noon if that suits. They parted with arrangements made for the following day. As Bethany climbed the stairs to her room, she reflected on the curious turn her journey had taken. She'd come to Nevada expecting to manage alone, yet found herself accepting help from this surprising cowboy whose path had crossed hers by chance, or was it providence, as Mrs. Wilkins had suggested. That night, a commotion in the hallway woke her from a light sleep. Voices argued, then a key rattled in her lock. Alarmed, Bethany reached for the pistol she kept beneath her pillow, aiming it at the door just as it swung open. A man she didn't recognize, rough-looking, with a beard and dirty clothes, stood frozen in the doorway, staring at the barrel of her gun. Behind him, the night clerk from the hotel was protesting weakly. He said he was your brother, madam, just arriving from back east. I have no brother, Bethany said coldly, her hand steady on the pistol. Step back or I'll shoot. The intruder raised his hands slowly. "Easy, lady, just a misunderstanding." He backed away, then turned and fled down the corridor. The clerk stammered apologies, but Bethany barely heard them, her heart pounding in her ears. When she was alone again, door securely locked, she sat on the edge of the bed, hands finally trembling with delayed fear. The incident confirmed Preston's warnings about Goldfield and Silverstone's influence. Someone wanted access to her room to search her father's papers, perhaps, or worse. She didn't sleep the rest of the night, pistol close at hand. At first light, she packed her belongings, paid her bill, and moved to the small church boarding house at the edge of town, where she took a room under the name Bethany Smith. Then she sent a message to Preston at his usual lodgings, explaining what had happened and her change of location. By mid-morning he appeared at the boarding house, concern evident in his expression. "Are you all right?" he asked immediately, shaken but unharmed, she assured him. "I'm ready to leave whenever you are." Preston's business concluded faster than expected, and by early afternoon they were on the road to Sage Creek Ranch, Bethany's wagon following behind his horse. As the dusty streets of Goldfield fell away, replaced by the open desert landscape, she felt tension easing from her shoulders. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for the warning about Silverstone, for offering your home." Preston glanced over at her, sunlight catching the planes of his face. "No need for thanks. Out here, neighbors look after each other." "Are we neighbors, then?" she asked with a slight smile. "Your claim is just beyond my north boundary," he replied. "So yes, technically, but more than that." He paused, seemingly searching for words. "I find myself concerned for your welfare, Miss O'Sullivan, more than neighborly duty might explain." The simple honesty of his statement caught Bethany off guard. In Boston, such directness would have been considered shockingly forward. Here, with the vast desert surrounding them and the memory of last night's danger still fresh, it felt right necessary even. "I find myself grateful for your concern," she replied carefully, "and perhaps reciprocating it in ways I didn't anticipate when we met." The admission hung between them, neither pushing further as the miles passed. By late afternoon, the familiar sight of Sage Creek Ranch appeared on the horizon. Mrs. Wilkins greeted Bethany like a long-lost relative, clucking over her pallor and the night's events. "Silverstone Mining Company," she muttered disapprovingly as she showed Bethany to the same guest room she'd occupied before. "Vultures in fancy suits, the lot of them. Your father was wise not to sell to them directly, and you'd be wise to follow his example." Over supper, Bethany shared her findings at the claim and her uncertainty about how to proceed. Preston listened attentively, occasionally offering practical suggestions, while Mrs. Wilkins provided colorful commentary on Goldfield's business community. "What you need," the housekeeper declared as she served apple pie, "is an honest partner with mining experience and enough capital to begin modest development. Prove the claim's value before considering larger investors." "An excellent suggestion," Preston agreed, "but finding such a partner won't be easy." Mrs. Wilkins snorted. "No need to look far. You've got mining experience from your Texas days, and that cattle sale last month left you with capital to invest." Bethany looked up in surprise. "You worked in mining, Mr. Parnell?" A flush touched Preston's tanned cheeks as he shot Mrs. Wilkins a reproachful look. "Silver mining briefly before I saved enough for cattle. But Mrs. Wilkins is getting ahead of matters. You barely know me, Miss O'Sullivan. I wouldn't expect you to consider me as a business partner. Yet you've already proven more trustworthy than anyone else I've met in Nevada," Bethany pointed out. "Perhaps we should discuss the possibility." Later, after Mrs. Wilkins had retired, Bethany and Preston sat on the porch, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. The day's heat gave way to pleasant coolness, and somewhere in the distance, coyotes called to one another. "If we were to consider a partnership," Bethany began, "what terms would you suggest?" Preston seemed surprised by her directness but responded in kind. "I could invest enough for basic equipment and 2 hired men. We'd split any profits equally. You'd retain full ownership of the claim itself. That seems more than fair, Bethany said, impressed by the generous terms. There's risk involved, Preston cautioned. The gold might not be as plentiful as your father hoped. We could lose the investment entirely. All worthwhile endeavors involve risk, she replied, thinking of her journey from Boston, the risks she'd already taken to reach this point. They talked well into the evening, discussing practical matters of mining development, potential obstacles, and timelines. By the time they parted for the night, the outline of a partnership agreement had taken shape between them. In her room, preparing for bed, Bethany reflected on the curious path that had led her here. The broken wagon wheel that had seemed a disaster had introduced her to the one person in Nevada who might help her succeed. Coincidence seemed too small a word for such perfect timing. The following days established a comfortable rhythm. Mornings were spent reviewing her father's notes and developing plans for the claim. Preston taught her to read geological formations and recognize promising mineral signs. Afternoons often found them riding to the claim, taking samples, and mapping the most promising areas for initial development. Mrs. Wilkins, for her part, seemed pleased with this arrangement, often packing elaborate lunches for their excursions and making pointed comments about how well they worked together. If Preston noticed the matchmaking undertones, he gave no sign, maintaining a respectful, friendly distance that both reassured and, increasingly, frustrated Bethany. For she could no longer deny, at least to herself, that her feelings for Preston Parnell had grown beyond business partnership or friendship. His integrity, intelligence, and quiet strength attracted her in ways no Boston gentleman ever had. In his company, she felt both protected and respected, never diminished or patronized. On their fourth day at the claim, a significant discovery shifted their plans. Following a vein of quartz they'd been tracing, they uncovered a pocket of high-grade ore that glittered with gold in the sunlight. "Bethany," Preston called, excitement breaking through his usual reserve. "Look at this." She hurried to where he knelt beside a freshly exposed rock face. Seeing the unmistakable yellow gleam, she gasped, dropping to her knees beside him. "Is it what I think?" "Free gold," he confirmed, gently breaking off a small piece to show her. "Not just traces, this is a substantial find." Without thinking, she threw her arms around his neck in jubilation. "We did it. Father was right." For a breathless moment they remained thus, her face inches from his, their shared triumph creating an intimacy neither had anticipated. Preston's eyes darkened, dropping briefly to her lips, then back to her eyes, asking a silent question. Bethany answered by closing the distance between them, pressing her lips to his in a kiss born of joy and growing affection. His response was gentle at first, then deepened as his arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, reality intruded. "I'm sorry," Bethany said quickly, though she felt anything but sorry. "That was forward of me." "Don't apologize," Preston replied, his voice husky. "Unless you regret it, I don't," she admitted. "But perhaps we should focus on the gold for now." He nodded, though his eyes suggested he'd rather continue exploring this new development between them. "This changes our timeline. We need to file an amended claim immediately, secure proper equipment, and hire reliable men. And we need to be cautious. News of a strike like this travels fast." They carefully collected samples, concealing the exposure as best they could before heading back to the ranch. The ride was filled with practical discussion of next steps, but an undercurrent of awareness flowed between them, their earlier kiss hanging unspoken in the air. At the ranch, they shared their discovery with Mrs. Wilkins, who responded with characteristic pragmatism. "Best get married quick then," she declared, catching them both off guard. "Nothing stops claim jumpers like a husband with a shotgun standing watch while his wife holds legal title." "Mrs. Wilkins," Bethany protested, her cheeks flaming. "Don't Mrs. Wilkins me," the housekeeper retorted. "I've seen how you two look at each other, and it's practical besides. Women alone don't fare well in mining disputes, married women do better, and Preston needs a wife anyway before he turns into a permanent bachelor. Preston cleared his throat. Perhaps we should let Miss O'Sullivan decide her own matrimonial timing without our input. But the seed was planted. That night, unable to sleep, Bethany considered the practical aspects of Mrs. Wilkins's suggestion. Marriage would indeed strengthen her position legally. It would provide protection and partnership in a territory where both were valuable beyond measure, and if her heart was already engaged. The next morning, she found Preston in the barn, preparing to ride into Goldfield to file the amended claim papers. Gathering her courage, she approached him directly. "Before you go," she said, "I want to discuss Mrs. Wilkins's suggestion." Preston set down the saddle he was lifting. "You don't need to address that. She was overstepping." "Perhaps," Bethany acknowledged. But she wasn't wrong about the practical benefits, or about. She hesitated, then continued firmly, "about how I've come to feel about you." Preston's expression softened, hope kindling in his eyes. "Bethany, I won't deny I've developed feelings for you that go far beyond our business arrangement, but I'd never want you to consider marriage for practical reasons alone." "Not alone, no," she replied, stepping closer. "But practicality aligned with affection seems a solid foundation. Certainly better than many marriages I witnessed in Boston." He took her hands in his gaze intent. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" "I'm saying that if you were to ask me a certain question, I might be favorably disposed to answer in the affirmative," she replied, a smile tugging at her lips despite her formal words. The smile that broke across Preston's face was like sunrise over the desert. "Bethany O'Sullivan, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Not just for practical mining considerations, but because I believe we could build something rare and precious together." "Yes," she said simply, "I would." Their second kiss was longer than the first, a ceiling of promises and possibilities, interrupted only by Mrs. Wilkins calling from the house that breakfast was getting cold. The following days passed in a flurry of activity. Preston rode into Goldfield to file the amended claim papers and arrange for equipment, while Bethany prepared a list of supplies they would need for extended work at the site. They agreed to proceed with a small, quiet wedding at the Goldfield church the following week, with only Mrs. Wilkins and Preston's ranch foreman as witnesses. 2 days before the wedding, Preston returned from town with troubling news. "Silverstone knows about our find," he said grimly as he dismounted in the ranch yard. "Reed was asking questions all over town. They know I filed the amended claim papers." "How could they know?" Bethany asked, dismayed. "We've been so careful." "The assay office clerk, most likely. Harrington probably pays him for information." Preston led his horse to the water trough. "We need to move quickly." "I've arranged for the minister to marry us tomorrow instead of waiting until Sunday." That evening, as they sat on the porch after supper, Preston's vigilance was proven justified. Dust on the horizon announced riders approaching 3 men on horseback, led by Reed himself. "Stay inside," Preston instructed Bethany and Mrs. Wilkins, reaching for the rifle kept by the door. "If there's trouble, bar the doors and use the shotgun." He stepped into the yard as the riders approached, rifle held casually but ready. Reed reined in his horse a respectable distance away, the other men hard-looking fellows who wore their guns with practiced ease flanking him. "Evening, Parnell," Reed called. "Hoped we might have a word with Mrs. O'Sullivan." "Miss O'Sullivan is resting," Preston replied evenly. "State your business with me." Reed's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Mr. Harrington is concerned about his investment discussions with the lady. Seems she's been avoiding him." "Miss O'Sullivan has made other arrangements for her claim," Preston said. "As I believe you've discovered through your inquiries in town." Reed's expression hardened. "Harrington doesn't appreciate being played for a fool. 3,000 was a generous offer. He wants to ensure the lady understands the complications that might arise if she declines." "Sounds like a threat," Preston observed, his grip tightening on the rifle. A business reality, Reed countered smoothly. Claims get jumped, accidents happen, especially to women alone in mining territory. Miss O'Sullivan isn't alone, Preston replied, his voice dangerously quiet. And she won't be persuaded by intimidation. I suggest you relay that to Mr. Harrington, along with my personal guarantee that any harm coming to her or her property will be answered in kind. Reed studied him for a long moment, then nodded slightly. I'll convey your message. He turned his horse. Good evening, Parnell. As the riders departed, Bethany emerged from the house, having heard everything through the open window. They won't stop with threats, she said, a tremor in her voice. No, Preston agreed grimly, but neither will we. First thing tomorrow, we'll be married. Then we'll secure the claim properly, with armed men I trust. The wedding took place at dawn the next morning, a simple, hastily arranged ceremony in the Goldfield church. Bethany wore her best dress, a deep blue that brought out the color of her eyes, and carried wildflowers Mrs. Wilkins had gathered at first light. Preston, clean-shaven and dressed in his finest clothes, watched her approach the altar with an expression of wonder and determination. The minister, informed of the urgency without specifics, kept the ceremony brief but meaningful. When Preston slipped his mother's simple gold band onto Bethany's finger, pronouncing her his wife, she felt a surge of emotion that had nothing to do with mining claims or practical arrangements. Mrs. Parnell, he murmured as they exited the church, his hand warm at the small of her back. The name felt strange but right, a new identity to match her new life in this wild territory. They spent their first night as husband and wife not in romantic seclusion, but camped at the claim site with 4 armed ranch hands Preston trusted implicitly. It wasn't the honeymoon Bethany might have imagined, but there was intimacy in the shared purpose, the joint protection of their future. In the small tent Preston had erected for their privacy, surrounded by the vast Nevada night and the promise of gold beneath the ground, they consummated their marriage with tender exploration and growing passion. Afterward, lying in his arms, Bethany marveled at how far she'd come from Boston's drawing rooms to this desert claim and how perfectly right it felt. Any regrets? Preston whispered against her hair. Not one, she replied truthfully. Though I never imagined when my wagon wheel broke that I'd end up married to the cowboy who fixed it. He chuckled softly. I knew the moment I saw you standing beside that broken wagon, dust in your hair and determination in your eyes, that you were someone extraordinary. Following you to Goldfield was the easiest decision I ever made. You followed me, she asked, surprised. Of course, told myself it was to ensure the wheel held up, but I knew even then I wanted to know you better. The confession touched her deeply. What had seemed like coincidence, his appearance in Goldfield, just when she needed guidance, had been intentional care. A man following an instinct that there was something worth pursuing. The following weeks were intense, but rewarding. Under Preston's direction, they established a proper mining operation, hiring experienced men and purchasing equipment with the capital he provided. The initial vein proved even richer than they'd hoped, yielding enough gold in the first month to repay Preston's investment entirely. Silverstone made one more attempt at intimidation, sending men to interfere with their supply deliveries, but Preston's reputation and the loyalty of their workers prevented any serious disruption. When news of their success spread through the territory, other investors approached with partnership offers, allowing them to expand operations further. By the fall of 1876, 6 months after Bethany's arrival in Nevada, the O'Sullivan Parnell Mine, as they named it, honoring both their contributions, was producing steady returns. They built a proper house near the claim, larger and more comfortable than the original ranch house, though they maintained Sage Creek Ranch for its cattle operations. Mrs. Wilkins, of course, moved with them, declaring that young folks needed supervision even if they were legally wed. Her presence proved invaluable as Bethany discovered, to her joy and trepidation, that she was expecting their first child in the spring. On a crisp December evening, as they sat before the fire in their new home, Preston handed Bethany a small wooden box. "An early Christmas gift," he explained. Inside, she found a perfect miniature replica of a wagon wheel, carved from a combination of the ironwood he'd used to repair her original wheel and gold from their mine. "To remember how we began," he said softly. Tears pricked Bethany's eyes as she examined the exquisite craftsmanship. "As if I could forget, that broken wheel was the best mishap of my life." Preston laid his hand gently over hers where it rested on her growing belly. "Mine too, though I prefer to think of it as providence rather than mishap, Mrs. Wilkins would agree with you," Bethany smiled, leaning into his embrace. Outside, snow began to fall softly on the Nevada desert, a rare occurrence that transformed the harsh landscape into something magical. Inside, the fire crackled warmly, promising shelter against the winter chill. And between them, a child grew, the future taking shape just as surely as their mine and ranch expanded across the territory. The broken wagon wheel that had stranded Bethany O'Sullivan in the desert had led to everything she'd never known. She wanted a partnership of equals, a love built on respect and shared purpose, a home carved from the wilderness through combined strength and vision. In the spring of 1877, their son was born, James Preston Parnell, named for Bethany's father and his own. By then, the O'Sullivan Parnell mine had become one of the most prosperous in the territory, their fair business practices and generous community contributions earning respect throughout Nevada. When Jacob Harrington of Silverstone Mining Company finally approached with a genuine partnership offer, humbled by their success, and the changing political winds in the territory, Preston and Bethany considered it together, as they did all important decisions. "We don't need them anymore," Preston observed as they reviewed the proposal. "We've proven we can succeed on our own terms." "True," Bethany agreed, bouncing little James on her knee. "But joining forces might allow us to expand further, create more jobs." And she added with a smile that still made Preston's heart race, "I rather enjoy the irony of Harrington having to acknowledge a woman as an equal business partner." This blend of practical business acumen and personal satisfaction was typical of their partnership, one of the many reasons they thrived where others failed in the challenging Nevada mining industry. By 1880, their family had grown to include a daughter, Elizabeth Wilkins Parnell, named partly for the housekeeper who had become like a grandmother to their children. Their enterprises expanded to include banking interests in Carson City and investments in the Transcontinental Railroad. Bethany occasionally received letters from Boston acquaintances, expressing amazement at her transformation from school teacher to mining magnate. She answered these with amusement, never fully able to explain how naturally she had adapted to frontier life, how the constraints of Eastern society had always felt more foreign to her true nature than the open possibilities of Nevada. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Preston surprised her with a new wagon and elegant conveyance with reinforced wheels of his own design. "For the journey ahead," he told her as they stood in the yard of what had become a substantial estate, "wherever it takes us." Bethany looked from the wagon to the home they'd built, to their children playing under Mrs. Wilkins's watchful eye, to the mountains where their future had been quite literally carved from stone. "The journey has been remarkable so far," she said, taking his hand. "Though I hope this wagon's wheels hold up better than my last one," Preston laughed, pulling her close. "If they break, I'll fix them. I'm rather good at that, I'm told." "The best," she agreed, standing on tiptoe to kiss him. "Though I'm rather glad you followed me home that first time. It saved me the trouble of having to come back and find you myself." "You would have?" he asked, surprised even after all their years together. "Of course," Bethany replied confidently. "Some things are meant to be, broken wagon wheels and all." As they stood together in the Nevada sunshine, surrounded by the life they'd built from unlikely beginnings, neither could doubt the truth of her words. The wagon wheel that broke had been not an ending but a beginning, the first turn in a journey that continued to unfold with each passing year, leading them ever forward together.